It was an outrageous caper at 10,000 feet.
He gets onto an airplane, hijacks the airplane, gets all this money, he jumps out of the airplane.
The only trace the perpetrator left behind was a note and a phony name, one that would become famous.
D.B. Cooper obviously set the bar for hijackings, or skyjackings as they also came to be known.
The fact that his identity remains a mystery really turned him into a folk hero.
It was one of the most talked about crimes in the 1970s and made D.B. Cooper a household name. Cooper's incredible heist would even become the inspiration for a Hollywood movie starring Treat Williams. But few people know that 5 months after Cooper's risky hijacking, it happened again. This time it wasn't D.B. Cooper. It was a man named Richard McCoy. What drove a decorated veteran to copy one of the most audacious crimes of all time, and in the process become notorious? April 7th, 1972. Richard McCoy, a decorated Vietnam veteran, has just made a dramatic parachute landing from a moving jetliner in a cow pasture outside Provo, Utah, after successfully hijacking an airline passenger jet. As he lands and walks off into the night, he holds firm a duffel bag that contains his hopes and dreams, a way to a better life, all in the form of $500,000 in ransom money. For investigators, this successful mid-air hijacking was eerily similar to one that happened just 5 months earlier. In that incident on November 24, 1971, it's a bustling Thanksgiving Eve at the Portland, Oregon airport. At the ticket counter, a man checks in under the name Dan Cooper and boards Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 to Seattle, Washington. The media would later dub the man D.B. Cooper.
Today, if you go and try to purchase an airline ticket with cash, they're still going to ask you for all kinds of identity. In those days, you could literally walk up to the counter, hand cash over, they would hand you a ticket, and you walked onto the plane. There was never any question about identification in those days.
Shortly after taking off, the man hands the flight attendant a handwritten note. It reads, "I want $200,000 by 5 p.m. in cash. Put it in a knapsack. I want 2 back parachutes and 2 front parachutes. When we land, I want a fuel truck ready to refuel. No funny stuff, or I'll do the job." Cooper opened his briefcase and showed the flight attendant what appeared to be a bomb. Luckily, none of the passengers saw it. Cooper instructs the flight attendant to return the note, wary of potentially incriminating evidence.
He's hijacking an airplane with what looks like a bomb.
For 2 hours, the plane circles the Seattle-Tacoma airport, while below the FBI scrambles to fulfill Cooper's instructions.
While the hijacking is actually taking place, the pilots made a command decision, which is their right to do, and that is to not tell their passengers exactly what's happening. The last thing they needed in a situation in which a person may have had a weapon was somehow for the passengers to become upset and to cause a problem.
Once the FBI gathers the cash and parachutes, Cooper instructs the crew to land the plane. The plane is refueled, and the money and parachutes are delivered on board. But their hands are tied. They can't get too close and risk Cooper detonating the bomb. Then, a surprise.
36 passengers got off the jetliner in Seattle, left aboard 4 crew members and the hijacker.
Cooper allows all 36 passengers and 2 flight attendants to exit the plane. He keeps 4 members of the flight crew as hostages.
Essentially, all we know about this guy is he hijacks the airplane, shows a bomb, has it land, he lets the passengers go, gets all this money, and then they take off again. That story's getting pretty interesting already.
Cooper orders the plane to head toward Mexico City with detailed instructions that are crucial to his plan. Maintain an altitude of 10,000 feet, lower the flaps to 15 degrees, and fly at 170 knots, or about 200 miles an hour. 2 fighter jets tail the plane, but are unable to maintain such a low airspeed, hindering surveillance.
These planes are designed to fly much faster, especially at cruising altitude. 180 knots would be a very slow, very cumbersome way to fly that airplane.
As the plane streaks across the sky, Cooper orders the remaining flight attendant to join the rest of the crew in the cockpit and remain there with the door closed. Cooper next straps on a parachute, then secures the bag of money to his waist. At 8 p.m., Northwest pilots see a warning light flash inside the cockpit, indicating that the aft air stair apparatus has been activated. Moments later, D.B. Cooper climbs down the stairs and jumps into the night sky. In an instant, he is transformed from a regular guy into a notorious hijacker.
The pilots of the pursuing aircraft hadn't seen a man jump or a parachute deploy, so they had no true estimate of where the Skyjacker had jumped or landed.
Cooper vanishes without a trace along with $200,000. The sudden change in cabin pressure when Cooper lowered the aft stairs alerts the crew that something is amiss, and they land the plane at the nearest airport in Reno.
Somewhere, the hijacker parachuted away with the money. The rear stairwell was open all the way. It arrived at Reno in shreds.
How did you surmise that he was not on the plane when he landed in Reno?
A search was made of the plane immediately after landing.
To find out what happened to Cooper, FBI agents debrief the flight crew.
We gave the information to the authorities, and we just don't want to discuss it any further.
After interviewing the Northwest crew, FBI agents conclude that Cooper made a daring mid-air parachute jump. Based on the Northwest aircraft's altitude and speed, federal agents believe Cooper's landing zone is within a rugged area on the southernmost outreach of Mount St. Helens, a few miles southeast of Ariel, Washington.
The area in which D.B. Cooper was presumed to have landed was incredibly difficult to search.
Hundreds of troops combed the woods near Woodland and east to the town of Ariel.
To this day, it's unclear whether he actually survived the jump out of the aircraft in November of 1971 or made it.
Who was the man posing as D.B. Cooper, and where did he go? With the D.B. Cooper story reaching mythological proportions, it wasn't long before amateur detectives and members of the public claimed to have found remnants of his parachute and belongings. One of the most tantalizing discoveries occurred nearly a decade after the hijacking.
Then the Dwayne Ingram family entered the picture last February.
I was going to build a fire, and I had some wood in my arm, and I got ready to set it down, and my son ran up and said, "Wait a minute, Daddy." So he raked a place out in the sand there, and there it was. It kind of tumbled up on the top.
What his young son found was part of Cooper's loot, badly decomposed, in bundles, still in the same order when packed 9 years ago.
Aside from his tie clip and some of the money, Cooper left little evidence behind. Over time, Cooper's crime became one of the FBI's most notorious unsolved cases.
He potentially succeeded. Didn't get caught. They gave him the money, got out of the plane. He's really become this kind of folk hero.
And he inspired imitators. Within a year, there were at least 15 attempts at similar skyjackings. Only one stood out. The hijacking of United Airlines Flight 855 on April 7, 1972. The mastermind of this skyjacking had a unique history. He was Richard McCoy, a 29-year-old Vietnam vet and former Mormon Sunday school teacher.
He was a likable guy. He looked like Steve McQueen.
Bernie Rhodes worked for the federal government in Utah in the early 1970s. It was there where he became acquainted with McCoy.
He was really a dedicated member of the Mormon Church, and he taught Sunday school and tried to influence children.
At the time of the hijacking, Rhodes says the married father of two was constantly arguing with his wife over money.
There was a lot of turmoil between the two of them.
On the morning of April 7, 1972, Karen McCoy, who was involved in her husband's skyjacking plans, packs his luggage, types up his hostage note, and drives him to the Salt Lake International Airport. Even though McCoy's suitcase contains a fake hand grenade, he has no problems getting his baggage through airport security.
Airport security was drastically different. There were very few restrictions about what could be brought onto an airplane. Luggage wasn't inspected as thoroughly. There was no TSA at that time, so there were no pat-downs, things like that.
A short time later, McCoy boards United Airlines Flight 855 under an alias.
Richard Floyd McCoy used the name James Johnson, and he went and got on the plane, flew to Denver, Colorado.
McCoy next buys a ticket to Los Angeles.
Why would somebody fly into one airport and then immediately buy a ticket for another flight?
Criminal behavior is not linear, meaning it doesn't go stepwise, do A, B, C, and D, because very often you do A and B and then something changes. And in the case with McCoy, he almost missed his flight.
McCoy is surprised by the unexpectedly long ticket lines at the airport. He races through the terminal, barely making it on board the flight to Los Angeles.
He was very nervous that he wasn't going to make the flight, and so he became jittery and actually frantic.
McCoy boards the plane under his alias, James Johnson. While other passengers take their seats, McCoy initiates the next phase of his plan.
He went straight to the bathroom, and when he came out, he was all dolled up in a different outfit.
McCoy's disguise includes a mustache, sunglasses, and a wig with an elastic headband. But his cover is nearly blown by a freshly dyed wig that oozes black dye down his face, keeping him in the airplane bathroom longer than he planned.
Unless you're truly a master of disguise, it's very difficult to actually hide your physical identity. McCoy tried to do so on the day of his skyjacking and quite frankly failed rather miserably.
Once in the air, McCoy hands a sealed envelope labeled hijack instructions to the passenger seated next to him. It reads, "Give this envelope to the girl and have her take it to the captain." Members of the flight crew would later tell authorities that McCoy acted as cool as a cucumber, like a man who was no stranger to danger. But was McCoy more than just a copycat hijacker? That's what would end up making him notorious. On November 24th, 1971, a man calling himself D.B. Cooper carries out the brazen hijacking of Northwest Orient Flight 305. Leaping into the cold night air with a parachute and $200,000 in ransom money, he was never seen again. Cooper's notorious feat was the inspiration for copycat hijackings, including the most famous one by Richard McCoy. It was also romanticized in songs and books, including the 1980 novel Free Fall, which was the basis for the 1981 movie The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper, starring Robert Duvall and Treat Williams. But on April 7, 1972, Richard McCoy's story was grounded in stark reality. He set in motion a plan almost identical to Cooper's. McCoy hands a sealed envelope labeled hijack instructions to the passenger seated next to him. It reads, "Give this envelope to the girl and have her take it to the captain." When the flight attendant arrives, the passenger gives her envelope with a handwritten message that says, "Grenade pin pulled, pistol loaded." Inside the envelope, she finds a hand grenade pin and a .45 caliber bullet. McCoy then hands her typed instructions for the pilot and a threat: meet his demands or he'd blow up the plane. He wanted the plane to change course.
En route to Los Angeles, he had him to divert the plane to San Francisco because he was familiar with that area.
He also wanted money and a way off the plane.
He wanted an even $500,000 split into different types of denominations, and he also wanted 4 parachutes.
As in the D.B. Cooper skyjacking, the passengers are unwitting hostages, so FBI agents in San Francisco have little choice but to gather the money and parachutes McCoy wanted. McCoy is a Vietnam veteran, helicopter pilot, and avid skydiver. In fact, McCoy is so experienced that he knows the FBI parachutes likely included tracking devices.
He'd never planned to use one of the FBI parachutes and had only wanted to throw them out of the plane as a diversion.
To get to the ground, McCoy had packed his own parachute. In the meantime, United Airlines supply the FBI with a $500,000 ransom money, which the agency intermingles with its own marked bills.
In any sort of a hijacking or kidnapping, when there's a request for money or for cash, the FBI never actually provides that money. It's up to the victim, be it a person or a company, to get the money, him or herself. The FBI has what's known as show money, where some bills are already marked, some bills are already recorded, and it may be in a case or a satchel with some kind of a homing device. As the aircraft made its approach to San Francisco International Airport, agents were already in place.
The hijacked United Airlines Flight 855 lands in San Francisco.
SWAT teams and other personnel were located around the airport and made sure they had full view of the aircraft itself.
With so many hostages' lives at stake, law enforcement had to be careful of every move they made.
The ultimate goal was first to get all the passengers off. They didn't want any hostages on board the aircraft.
McCoy's instructions direct the captain to park at runway 19 left to refuel. His instructions also stipulate that his handwritten note should be returned to him after being read. McCoy doesn't want to leave any trace of evidence. Meanwhile, parachute rigger Perry Stevens finishes packing the skydiving gear just as McCoy requested.
The money and the parachutes were handed over, and now they're waiting for the next step for it to take place.
His demands met, McCoy orders the passengers off the plane. However, like Cooper, McCoy keeps some hostages.
The hijacker insisted on the crew, the captain, and the co-pilot staying on board.
As passengers and one flight attendant deplane, McCoy forgets a key detail.
During the course of the hijacking, McCoy provided a note to the flight attendant to give to the captain, which related his demands to provide to the ground, to the FBI, to the airliner, etc. In all the excitement, apparently McCoy forgot to ask for that note back from the flight attendant as she hid it on her person.
McCoy leaves a crucial piece of evidence behind, his handwritten note, which the flight attendant keeps, but he has bigger things to worry about. He is betting he can parachute from the plane and elude the authorities before they close in on him. The prize for success is $500,000 in cash. Just before 8 p.m., hijacked Flight 855 returns to the sky, but problems arise immediately. A turbulent ascent causes McCoy's backup chute to deploy. Now, he has to rely on one of the FBI's parachutes. Meanwhile, after examining the ransom money, McCoy tells authorities that he will be leaving explosives behind on the plane when he parachutes out. If he is followed, he will detonate the explosives.
He didn't want to be followed or pursued by other aircraft. Nonetheless, the FBI still put aircraft behind the jetliner to make sure they could have a visual on it during the entire flight. And even though the passengers were off the flight, they still had a crew on board. They didn't want to lose those folks either.
Like D.B. Cooper, McCoy supplies the pilot with a flight plan. This one sends the plane on a southwest course towards Nevada. Similar to Cooper's instructions, McCoy instructs the pilot to fly at a slow speed of 200 miles per hour and an altitude of 16,000 feet. Finally, McCoy orders all 4 remaining crew members into the cockpit and kills the lights in the cabin. Once McCoy is alone in the cabin, he puts on a jumpsuit, helmet, and parachute. McCoy then affixes the large duffel bag of money to his body and lowers the staircase into position.
Just like D.B. Cooper had done, McCoy wanted to make his jump from the aft stairs for what was clearly the biggest jump of his life.
The stakes are high, but McCoy has seen action in Vietnam. He isn't about to turn back.
Chances of making it through a jump like that and living to tell about it are really pretty remarkable.
And then he launches his body into the darkness. In nearly every respect, the mid-air heist is almost identical to D.B. Cooper's skyjacking of Northwest Orient Flight 305 5 months earlier. For law enforcement investigators, that similarity is an uncanny coincidence, or is it something more than that? After hijacking United Airlines Flight 855 under the alias James Johnson, Richard McCoy makes a daring nighttime parachute jump with $500,000 in ransom money. The crime has all the earmarks of a similar skyjacking perpetrated just 5 months earlier, in November of 1971, by the now infamous D.B. Cooper. And since D.B. Cooper's real identity was never revealed, nothing was ever known about his background. But authorities would not face the same dilemma with Richard McCoy. On December 7, 1942, Richard McCoy Jr. was born in Kingston, North Carolina.
He was an awkward kid with big ears and a lisp.
His Mormon faith shaped him, and as a young man, he moved to Provo, Utah to attend Brigham Young University.
But Richard craved adventure. At 19, he actually dropped out of college and he joined the Army, and he became a Green Beret, and then he went to Vietnam.
McCoy was considered a good soldier who got the job done. In 1964, he suffered shrapnel wounds in combat operations, earning a Purple Heart. He was sent back to the U.S. He decided to leave active duty, and in 1965, McCoy resumed studies at BYU in Provo. There, he met a scholarship student named Karen Burns, and the two quickly fell in love and got married.
McCoy and his wife were happy for a short period of time, and their marriage was pretty much stable.
There were 2 children, a son and a daughter, and he loved them, and he did all the things for them.
McCoy was now a family man, and it was a huge shift from his previous life in the Army.
He had a Purple Heart, yet nobody gave him the sort of special attention that he believed he deserved. And if you have a level of arrogance and narcissism within you, it's much, much harder than to adapt to civilian life where you don't get that type of recognition. And as a consequence, he grew bitter, depressed.
McCoy decided to re-enlist and signed up for helicopter training. He returned to Vietnam in 1967, where he was a helicopter pilot.
He felt it was his duty to seek out dangerous and difficult assignments, and he distinguished himself in the line of fire. He earned a Commendation Medal for Valor.
His military record shows that he probably saved 30 guys that were surrounded by Viet Cong. And the fellas, they ran and jumped in the helicopter, and he took off, and with shots fired at his helicopter, and he got them out, and everybody got out alive. And those are all a matter of record.
After a year of combat duty, McCoy was transferred to Germany for 2 years.
He wanted to do another tour in Vietnam, but his wife had had enough. So he ended his active military career, went back home, and started his civilian life in Utah.
But the return to civilian life left McCoy feeling unfulfilled. On top of that, he still couldn't make enough money to satisfy his wife.
McCoy, no doubt, was one of the many members who came back and somehow felt he'd be seen as a hero. But instead, it was just the opposite.
McCoy wanted to be recognized as a hero, and he longed for the sense of excitement he felt in Vietnam.
An individual who starts out wanting to be seen as extraordinary and grand when it's not actualized and when you don't really get the support and adulation that you would like, you go in the opposite direction and become depressed and see yourself as inadequate and become very frustrated that others don't recognize your extraordinary abilities.
Still searching for a career path, he resumed his studies at BYU, majoring in law enforcement. He also took up skydiving with a friend and fellow Vietnam vet, Bob Van Iperen. Law enforcement and skydiving seemed to have little in common, until McCoy researched a class paper on how to prevent skyjackings. As part of the research, McCoy placed himself in the role of a federal agent, passenger, and skyjacker.
He created scenarios in his mind where he was using his skills that he learned in the military. This gave him a period of really psychological elation. He would imagine that his life was more grand and exciting than it really was.
Gradually, the research exercise evolved into an actual plot, one that could solve his money problems and quench his thirst for action and adventure. It was an adventure McCoy was now realizing as he was hurtling toward the ground with $500,000 in ransom money.
It was almost midnight when he jumped. The sky was black. The wind was freezing.
This jump isn't going as smoothly as his previous jumps.
Something went wrong. The heavy duffel dangling between his legs had shifted to the left and sent him spinning, and he could not counter the effect. He became weak, dizzy, nauseated, and even blacked out momentarily.
His spinning motion twists McCoy's parachute lines, but he somehow manages to successfully deploy the chute as he approaches the ground. He lands in the mountains near Provo, Utah.
His wife was to meet him just south of Provo, but she became frightened because of all of the cars around in that area, and she went home.
Exhausted and with an injured ankle, McCoy doesn't have the strength to haul his money and gear to town. Instead, he hides them in an open drain underneath a country road. When his wife fails to show at a predetermined rendezvous point, McCoy knows he has to get home on his own. As McCoy limps towards home, the plane he'd hijacked approaches the airport in Salt Lake City.
When the airliner finally landed, the FBI agents on the tarmac knew they had a crime scene that they had to examine. And that's exactly what they did. They went inside and carefully took apart every aspect of that plane they could, looking for fingerprints, looking for hairs and fibers, looking for anything that the hijacker may have left behind. They knew that may be the strongest clue to finding out just who this person was.
They don't find much, only the note that McCoy had forgotten to retrieve.
And that note, in fact, contained some valuable evidence on it.
For the first time, the FBI had the hijacker's handwriting. It could potentially help authorities convict a suspect, but it couldn't help them find him. While the FBI scour the crime scene, McCoy makes his way home. Before daybreak, he retrieves the hidden ransom money and stashes it in their house. Meanwhile, a secret manhunt is in full force in Utah.
Investigators were cautious about how they wanted to reveal that there was a manhunt going on in a residential area. They didn't want the public to interfere with the search.
But the search doesn't last long. The FBI catches a break.
It wasn't too long after the hijacking actually ended that the FBI received a call. It was a call from a friend of McCoy.
McCoy had unwisely told his old skydiving buddy, Bob Van Ipperen, that he had outlined a foolproof plan for hijacking an airplane. Ipperen knew McCoy's military experience and skill set. He also knew McCoy lived near where the hijacker jumped.
He called the Bureau and said, you know, Richard McCoy jumps, and he's a good free faller, and he's done all of the things that this D.B. Cooper's done.
Authorities now at least had a name. They learned about McCoy's National Guard shift and went to the airport. Just hours after his brazen crime, McCoy faced questions from the FBI.
The agents convinced McCoy to come into the FBI office. They interviewed him for numerous hours. However, he wouldn't admit to doing the hijacking. He claimed he had an alibi and he was somewhere else. And basically, the agents did not just have the probable cause to make the arrest right there. They tried every which way they could, asking him this question, asking that question, but he just wouldn't acknowledge it. Before the day was out, they had to release him.
All investigators had was a single handwritten note. Investigators sent the note to a handwriting expert who compared the writing found on the plane with McCoy's writing on military service records. The expert concluded that McCoy had, in all likelihood, written the note. To make an arrest, the FBI felt it needed more evidence, and once again they were in luck.
One of the witnesses on the aircraft happened to remember that the person sitting in that seat picked up a magazine and was reading it before the actual hijacking took place.
Did the hijacker carelessly leave his prints on a magazine back on the plane? It might be the crucial piece of evidence authorities needed. In the 1960s, Richard McCoy had joined the Army, become a Green Beret, and served in Vietnam. But when his tour of duty ended, he returned to a divided nation, as well as the financial stress of supporting a wife and 2 kids. To solve his problems, Richard devised an audacious plan, a risky scheme that would forever make him notorious. In April 1972, McCoy, armed with a pistol and a grenade, skyjacked a commercial flight, successfully parachuting out of the plane with $500,000 in a duffel bag.
Richard did it for money, and $500,000 can bring an awful lot of respect.
Bernie Rhodes is the author of D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy, a book that makes the startling claim that Cooper and McCoy were one and the same.
We outlined 23 different pieces of evidence connecting Richard McCoy to the first airplane hijacking where the name Cooper was used.
Rhodes' most powerful piece of evidence is that he says he disproved McCoy's alibi, that the day after the Northwest hijacking he was in Provo, Utah, sitting down to Thanksgiving dinner with his wife.
No, he wasn't in Provo, because we have evidence that he purchased gas at Power Thrust service station close to the airport in Las Vegas, Nevada, and signed his name for the gas certificate.
But for authorities, the D.B. Cooper mystery was less important than the case at hand. The skyjacking of United Airlines Flight 855, they had a suspect, Richard McCoy. The problem was they didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest.
McCoy just hijacked an airplane and he got away with it. He felt confident and he really didn't see the need for hiding evidence. As far as the rest of the world was concerned, from his point of view, he was just some average person from Utah. He made it through the hard part, which was jumping out of the airplane with the money, and he was in the clear.
But McCoy had made a critical error.
One of the witnesses on the aircraft happened to remember that the person sitting in that seat picked up a magazine and was reading it before the actual hijacking took place.
Investigators examined the magazine and found fingerprints. Fingerprint specialists determined that a latent print on the magazine matched a print taken from McCoy during his time in the Army. It was the break they needed.
Once the fingerprint match was made at the FBI laboratory, the agents went about getting an arrest warrant for McCoy and a search warrant for his home.
On April 9, 1972, 2 days after the hijacking, Richard McCoy was arrested and charged with aircraft piracy and interfering with the United Flight 855. He was held without bond while authorities searched his house.
The pistol was found used in the hijacking, the fake hand grenade was found, as well as just about all the money taken in the hijacking itself. That's what the FBI calls pretty good evidence of a crime found right in the house of the person they just arrested.
McCoy, with concern for his 2 children at home, never mentioned that his wife was involved in the caper. As headlines announced that the money had been found, and a local man was the Skyjacker, some investigators wondered if Richard McCoy could be D.B. Cooper in the flesh. McCoy and Cooper did share some qualities.
D.B. Cooper was obviously someone who had experience with skydiving and/or parachuting. He certainly knew his way around an aircraft. It's very possible Cooper had a background in the U.S. military.
We look at the D.B. Cooper episode and somebody commandeering an airplane and then jumping out the back and parachuting into wilderness. You look at that and you say to yourself, well, how many people could there possibly be that had that background?
McCoy's trial began on Monday, June 26, 1972. Over 4 days, the jury heard a stream of damning testimony. A ticket agent said McCoy had bought a ticket on the hijacked flight under the name James Johnson. An FBI handwriting expert said the hijacker's note matched writing found in McCoy's Army records. And, of course, McCoy's fingerprints were on the magazine the hijacker had leafed through. When it was revealed that nearly $500,000 of the ransom money was found in McCoy's home, his fate was sealed. After just 2 hours, the jury found McCoy guilty of aircraft piracy. McCoy was given a 45-year sentence. But to his surprise, in prison, McCoy had the status of a celebrity inmate.
The inmates saw him as a hero. The correctional officers thought he was a cool guy for the crime he almost got away with. And there was always media and TV show type of request to interview the man. If he didn't accomplish much in his life prior to this hijacking, he certainly felt like a celebrity now.
And he liked that type of status. The cause of his depression was that he hadn't been seen as a hero for his war efforts. Now he was given a great deal of attention in the institution, and he really liked it.
At Pennsylvania's Lewisburg Federal Prison, McCoy met Melvin Walker, who had once escaped from police custody using a key he had fashioned himself.
2 United States Marshals were transporting him from Atlanta to Louisville. He had the key in a toothpaste package. He got the key out and he unlocked handcuffs, the belly chain, the feet.
Walker managed to get his hands on one of the marshal's guns. He ordered them to drive him into the wilderness, where he made his escape. But Walker was quickly caught and returned to prison. Now, he and McCoy began to talk about another escape. McCoy hoped to win an appeal by challenging the warrant investigators had used to search his home, but it wasn't going well.
His lawyers went about filing appeal after appeal in an attempt to reduce his sentence or have him acquitted completely. However, none of them worked. The 45-year sentence was standing.
As a probation officer at Lewisburg Federal Prison, Bernie Rhodes was assigned the task of interviewing the hijacker and getting insight into his state of mind.
He told me, I cannot serve 45 years. I can't serve and be eligible for parole in 20 years. My children will be grown, they'll be gone, they'll be married.
With his hope for a reduced sentence gone, McCoy had nothing to lose. he and Walker made a plan.
The two men were very resourceful. McCoy's creative thinking came from his time in the Army when he was put in situations where he had to use the resources that he had around him to save his life. He believed that he was doing just that in prison.
The plan was simple, but incredibly dangerous. Armed with a fake gun, they would wait in the prison yard for the right moment to hijack a garbage truck as it went through the inner prison gate. In preparation, they regularly ran wind sprints past the guard tower, normalizing their behavior for the guards.
They would run and laugh, and one would beat the other one, and he'd sweat and fall over and it'd get their attention up in the guard tower, and the guards would look in amusement at these two guys.
Busting out of prison was one thing, but eluding authorities once they escaped was another. Plus, they needed a hideout. Luckily, Richard had an ace in the hole, his wife, who frequently visited him at the prison.
Richard's wife brought him money and brought him plans and gave him exact instructions on how to get away.
There was only one part of the plan left. They needed a gun, or at least something that looked like a gun. McCoy, who worked in the prison's dental office, managed to smuggle out a container of plaster of Paris, which was used to make dental molds.
With the material from the dental office, Melvin Walker made the pistol.
On August 10th, 1974, armed with the phony pistol, McCoy, Walker, and two other inmates execute their plan to hijack a garbage truck.
They worked their way closer to the guard tower, and when the garbage truck came in, they were behind it, so the guard could not see them.
This is their moment. They jump in the truck.
The prisoners were barely inside the cab of the garbage truck when they were met with gunfire from the guards. They had to act quickly or they would be sent back into the prison and receive an addition to their sentences. Walker hit the gas, and the four men were officially on the run.
The hijacked garbage truck crashes through the prison gate and speeds onto the street. Another of Richard McCoy's outlandish plans has worked. But this flight to freedom would come to a violent end. August 10th, 1974. Convicted skyjacker Richard McCoy and three fellow inmates pulled off the first successful escape from Lewisburg Federal Prison in Pennsylvania. They had done it by using a phony gun fashioned from materials found in the prison's dental lab. Within hours, a large-scale manhunt is in full swing.
Obviously, if one person escapes from prison, it's a very high priority for law enforcement. If it's four, and they're dangerous criminals, and they think they have a real gun, it takes it to the highest priority of all. Local law enforcement all around that prison, all around that state, were on a full lookout for these four escaped inmates.
After breaking out of prison, the fugitives immediately steal a car and make their way to Pollocksville, North Carolina, where they rob a bank. Helicopters spot the four men in their getaway car. The outlaws flee the vehicle and split up.
Two of them were captured right away. However, McCoy and Walker stayed on the lam.
McCoy and Walker disappear into the swampy terrain. They steal a car and head for Virginia, but they need a permanent place to hide, and luckily they have one, a house they rent under a fake name. The duo for the most part lay low, only surfacing to go to town to buy food and water. The pair is cautious never to re-enter the house together. One man waits in the getaway car while the other enters the house through the garage side door.
When he opened the door and got in, then everything was safe, and he would turn the light on in the garage and raise the door.
That is the signal to the other fugitive that it is okay to enter. For months, the precautions seem to work, but when the felon's money begins to run low, desperation sets in.
It's hard to run and stay on the run for that length of time. One of the reasons it's difficult to do that is that the people on the run become complacent. They stop taking the precautions that they need to take not to get caught.
McCoy and Walker decide to pull off a bank heist.
They got $78,000, and they were now in business.
With the big take from the robbery, Walker and McCoy will retire from crime. On November 6, 1974, the duo take a road trip to Tuskegee, Alabama to check on a 185-acre farm that Walker knows about. To McCoy, it looks like the perfect place to bring his wife and children. But in the meantime, the FBI has received an anonymous tip that McCoy and Walker are hiding out at a home in Virginia Beach. On Saturday, November 10th, McCoy and Walker return from their road trip. They follow their usual protocol.
It was McCoy's turn to get out of the car and walk inside the house. When McCoy walked inside his house, he heard someone say, "FBI, move quietly and shut the door." At that point, McCoy pulled out his weapon, fired a shot, but fortunately missed.
It was the only shot McCoy could get off.
The FBI agent fired a shotgun, hitting him at point-blank range, and he bled out there on the scene.
It was the end of the strange life of Richard McCoy, a devout Mormon and decorated war hero who became a skyjacker. Some believe McCoy chose death over a return to prison.
I think he was committing suicide.
Very often an individual will attempt suicide by cop. That is, when the police are there with their guns out, you take a gun out and make as if you're going to shoot a police officer in order to get them to shoot you, and basically it's a way to get yourself dead without having to kill yourself.
Melvin Walker's days on the run were over too.
Within minutes, Melvin Walker was arrested, circling the block in the car.
The FBI finally caught up to some of the most notorious criminals that they had ever encountered.
With McCoy dead and the case wrapped, investigators were left with only one question. Had D.B. Cooper gone to the grave with Richard McCoy? Were they the same man?
To this day, D.B. Cooper has never been identified. It's unclear whether he was actually survived the jump out of the aircraft in November of 1971. After him, there were 15 other people, at least, who attempted similar types of hijackings of aircraft. McCoy probably came the closest to actually replicating what D.B. Cooper did about 6 months prior.
Other similarities stood out between McCoy and Cooper. McCoy looked like the sketch of Cooper, and a relative of McCoy said the mother-of-pearl tie clip investigators found after Cooper's heist belonged to McCoy. Then there were McCoy's National Guard duty records. Showing his known location the week of Cooper's hijacking gave him the opportunity to carry out the crime.
Whether or not McCoy was D.B. Cooper, I don't think is going to be demonstrable.
So, was Richard McCoy the infamous D.B. Cooper? The world may never know, but their crimes have become legends that continue to fascinate.
The public likes somebody that could pull the wool over the FBI.
We like the idea that somebody kind of got away with something like that. It creates an American legend. It just adds to the legend to speculate about whether McCoy and Cooper are one and the same.